Yeah, I'll be speaking on the famine weed way forward, and as you, I believe Guy Preston has spoken a little bit about it, introduced you a little bit to it, but just to explain a bit what has happened so far is that during this year, famine weed is kind of for the last couple of years, it's been kind of a hot topic, and so the national strategy for the management of famine weed in South Africa is in the process of being developed. It is not finalized yet. It actually is going out to reviewers today. But so it is in the process, and just to explain to you what has happened so far with famine weed, and I'll explain to you now what is famine weed for those of you who haven't seen the presentation from Guy Preston. But basically, from June this year, we started with the process of getting participants into a workshop in KZN firstly, and then later a workshop in Mpumalanga. We had a first draft, people commented on it, a second draft, more people commented on it. Various session of workshops happened to try and get everyone's input, and for those of you who have ever been involved with trying to put together a strategy and having so many participants involved, it is a difficult task in trying to get everyone's opinion and making sure everyone is happy. It's kind of actually impossible. So we've hoping we have included most people's comments, and that it is getting to an end now, which we hopefully get it out on the 30th of November. And yeah, so it's in the third draft now at the moment. It was prepared for the Department of Environmental Affairs, and it goes together with another document, which is the implementation plan for famine weed, okay, which basically gives a budget and explains all the goals and how we're going to be reaching it. Now, I just explained to you a little bit of what is famine weed. It's an annual plant. It has small white flowers, very high seed production. Seedling germination germinates between spring and summer, but areas of Zululand, for instance, where you have perfect climatic conditions for the plant, it really flowers right through the year. So it is a big problem in that area. And it can set seed within 4 weeks of germination. It is a very aggressive colonizer of disturbed habitats or denuded areas. Now, this is a very important point, because if you're managing your fowl properly, you shouldn't really be getting famine weed. So this is definitely one way of trying to manage famine weed. It produces allelopathic chemicals, which mainly inhibits the growth of other species around it, and reproduction is by seed. And the seed is spread primarily by vehicles, machinery, and sheet water flow through floods. And so seed spread by wind is very limited then. Just explain to you where it comes from. It basically comes from I'm not sure if you guys use some of these slides, but you might see some of his slides too. We all seem to use a lot of the same slides. But it's native to tropical and subtropical Americas, and it's basically invaded now over 30 countries, where a lot of countries are still grappling with how to manage it. And so far, Australia is the only country who's successfully tried to control the species, not eradicate it, but it seems to be more under control than in other countries where it is a problem. Okay, the impacts of it, crop production, because of the allelopathic effect, and this is really a summary of the impacts. There's a huge variety of impacts, and we can't go through all of them today, but just to go through a little bit of it, allelopathic impacts on the crop production. Hand weeding exacerbates the problem, so you have a lot of small-scale farming where they don't have access to herbicides, and they're going to hand hoe it, and it makes it, it kind of makes the problem a lot worse. Human health, this is one of the greatest concerns for the species, that it actually does have an impact on human health. And we're really picking up areas where people are reporting rashes, and people who actually live with it every day are experiencing and have been reporting that various symptoms and asthma and problems that they are dealing with. So it causes dermatitis, hay fever, and asthma. And, for instance, in Australia, where it was a huge problem in certain areas, and still is, there's been a lot of loss of working days. People have moved away from those areas where they've used to stay because they just can't handle the health impacts of it. And this increases the medical costs in that region. So it has a big impact on the economy of the country then too. Livestock production, meat and milk may be tainted, may be toxic to livestock. And so if you have incorrect felt management practices, family weed will come into that area and it kind of takes over, and obviously it lessens the amount of grazing available to the livestock. Biodiversity, famine weed invades overgrazed areas, and the grazers generally avoid famine weed, which puts further pressure on grazing. Now, this is the kind of challenge we're dealing with in South Africa. There's been a lot of studies done in other countries, but very few in South Africa really are looking at the impacts on wildlife species. So, but yeah, looking at water buffalo in India does have an effect, and could we say it's going to have the relatively same impact in South Africa? We still have to look and see. These slides might be used by Guy Preston too. But looking at, this is some of, where does this thing? But yeah, looking at the guy on the left there, quite a bad rash and dermatitis there, and various amounts of skin rashes. And then the goats do feed on it. It's been quite a lot of reports on it from around Zululand. Goats feed on it, and does seem to have impact on them. Looking at this is a photo of a cow, I think, with been feeding on famine weed. And then there's been quite a famous photo in the middle there. It's quite small, unfortunately, but of a rana with pink lips. And we thinking that it's also caused by the famine weed, which a photo from Ian McDonald actually took. Now, this is from great photos from Ian Rushworth, that when he flew over some parts in Zululand, and it looks all great, probably some maize around there, and actually a lot of it is famine weed, I'll show you now. But large infestations are occurring currently in KZN, more towards the north of KZN, and then isolated patches down all the way down to, sounds like I'm reading the weather, but down to Durban. And then Mpumalanga province, quite bad, they're around Nelspruit and those areas too. And to a lesser extent, to Northwest province. And then isolated infestations, Limpopo, and Gauteng. There's been in Centurion, there's been a case reported there too. Now, there might be a lot more of it occurring because there's starting to be a more general awareness of the weed. And so as there's a greater awareness of the weed, there's increased reporting. And once we start doing more mapping and surveillance, we might pick up a lot more of the species. Okay, now this is from Ian's photos. You can see that all the red is actually famine weed. And I think, why is this thing not working anymore?
Chris, the furthest one away from me.
It's not working. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh, there it doesn't want to shine all the way. But anyway, you can see all this parts in the red is then. This is interesting where you can see it's an old homestead. People have moved away. And so obviously this area has been overgrazed, or it's been planted up with maize. So the area is very disturbed. Then you get a huge invasion of famine weed occurring there. So it's it's aggressive colonizer of disturbed habitats. And so all of that is all famine weed. Okay, now looking at the historical and current distribution of famine weed, there's a lot more reports. Currently the red is the recent reports from 2008, 2014, but it also might be because of the greater awareness of the weed, and not particularly because or it could be that it's spreading a lot faster, we don't know. And the little small spots where it's originated was in Durban and in Nanda, and it's kind of spread up. Des Moines has made the weed spread a lot worse because of the floods. But yeah, this is looking at the climatic suitability of the weed. The dark parts looking at where it possibly can spread. So it's definitely not reached its potential, its invasion potential, and this is what the big concern is. And as you can see, I think the entire Swaziland is very suitable. And it already is quite bad in that area too. So NEMBA lists this species as a Category 1 species, which means it must be controlled. And landowners and managers are to notify, control, and prevent the spread. Now, this is a tricky one. How do you get people to report it and to control it? There's so many species that they probably have in their areas. But what the NEMBA says is that if it is in your garden or your area, or you as a landowner, then you have to manage it according to invasive species program if there is one for the species. Now, this is where the strategy comes in. Okay, so the strategy is basically, the objective of the strategy is to ensure collaboration, coordination, and prioritization of the allocation of resources to achieve this goal, the goal. So what this comes down to is then, basically, the strategy has then 8 goals to achieve. Number one being establishment of a program with sufficient funding and management capacity. Number 2 is detection and extirpation, which is local eradication of new infestations. Number 3 is reduction of existing, an extent of existing infestations. 4 is reduction in the health and environmental impacts on selected assets where containment is no longer possible. Number 5 is then creation of awareness among stakeholders to enable identification and understanding of the impacts and appropriate intervention actions. Number 6 is ensure national cross-sectoral coordination and collaboration between different spheres of government, stakeholders, and international countries bordering South Africa, ensuring that biological control is used to the fullest possible extent to reduce impacts and to assist other control methods. And lastly is to establishment and promotion of best practice management to all stakeholders. So it's quite a lot of goals that we'd like to achieve. And how do we achieve that is, I'll explain to you now. What we've done then is to take each goal, list all the actions, and then list performance indicators. In other words, when we annually do monitoring and evaluation of the strategy to see if we're making progress, if we look at the performance indicators, and then ensure that we are actually moving forward in terms of is famine weed becoming less. I'm not going to go through all the actions and performance indicators, because I'm going to bore you forever. But just to quickly look at the management zones that have been decided then, is that there are basically 5 management zones. So we've looked at dividing the entire country up into looking at all local municipalities. Each local municipality gets allocated a zone depending on the amount of infestation in the municipality. Number 1 being prevention zone. You have a P1 zone, which is no known population. Now, again, this is from grass paper that was written. So, we just adapted it to our conditions. So, no known populations would be in P1. So most of the Karoo and those sections where we wouldn't find really, it's not climatically suitable to it, we know that the management action, there's really no action, probably won't occur there, and our target is to have no famine weed in that area. P2 is, for instance, the Eastern Cape, all the way down to the coast, down to the Cape, a suitable environment for invasion, which is based on the climatic modelling. And the idea is then to have surveillance in that area, awareness, and report outbreaks, people to report it, and then our target is to have no famine weed in that area. Then extirpation zone, which means that the distribution is localized, so and the abundance is rare. The management actions are assessment, awareness, rapid response, and we want no famine weed in those areas. And then containment zones is where the distribution is scattered, it's frequent to common. The abundance, we're looking at various methods of control, and the target is then to reduce the extent of existing infestations. Then the asset protection zone, where, for instance, in Kanyakudu municipality in northern Zululand, it's very widespread there. What you want to do then is decide where are your assets and protect those assets, and I'll go through what we determine as an asset later. But the management action is basic integrated control with a focus on biocontrol, and then target is then to, as I said, asset protection. Now we looked at a scale, then also adopted, this is actually adopted from the grass paper, not the other one, but is famine weed present within the zone? If we say, yes, it is there, we have to ask ourselves, is eradication of all infestations within the zone feasible? If it is yes, then it becomes the extirpation zone. Now, this can be adopted, so if you're looking at a protected area, a scenario, and you have to do a plan, you could also use this to determine which areas inside the protected area fall in which zone. So what does all this mean? It basically means that first step, what the strategy says is we have to establish a national program, because you can't manage famine weed per province. It actually has to be a national thing where we're trying to have a coordinated focus areas across provinces. So there has to be a steering committee with various role players on it to get input from everyone. Looking at a national coordinator that's responsible to implement the strategy implementation plan, so they're responsible to ensure that it does things, someone to be held responsible for it. Ensure best practice management is applied all over the sphere of management, And then focus on increasing the biocontrol research and implementation. And then looking at addressing the veld management practices. So we need to work with relevant stakeholders to improve that. And then, as I said, each local municipality is allocated a management zone. So what we do in there, as I've said, prevention zone. Sorry, I've already gone through it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there are specific actions per prevention zone, extirpation zones, and then the aim is within these two zones are basically detection and extirpation of the new infestations. Yeah, and sorry, we said that all reports, sightings are to be reported to our spot, so we need a central place where all sightings could be reported to, and then all our awareness material would focus on explaining that and making sure that people report it to one central database. And then containment zones. Okay, so containment zones, we said that each local municipality, according to NEMBO, then have to have a monitoring, control, and eradication plan. That's what the MCE stands for. And inside the containment zone, your aim is then to reduce the extent of existing infestations. Now, with that, we're looking at inside the MCE plan, they'll look at reduce the infestations, integrated control, and awareness will be the focus in those areas. Asset protection is a different story then, because they'll also have to have an MCE plan. You can't just say, oh, we're going to reduce it. There has to be a proper plan in terms of determining your assets and how do you prioritize those assets in that zone. So, and basically we're saying it's the local municipality has to have it. It has to be a kind of a coordinated effort with various role players in that local municipality. You have to identify and prioritize the asset. We said high biodiversity areas would be prioritized inside that zone, and areas frequented by people because of the health impacts. So, because the aim is there to work, at the bottom you'll see work towards minimizing the health and environmental impacts, and that you can achieve by prioritizing the areas frequented by people, which are bus stops, along paths, around houses and schools. And then other thing is to minimize the spread out of the zone. And we looked at integrated controls, very important there. We have to improve veld management in those areas. And it becomes a very difficult problem if you have communal grazing areas. How do you actually look at improving the veld management techniques there? Focus on biocontrol in those areas because there won't be enough funding ever to try and manage the species within those areas. And herbicide assistance to landowners is another big thing to try and get costs down to. And the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders then. DEA, or Department of Environmental Affairs, they're in charge of NEMBA, and therefore the famine weed management program, as we're advocating the strategy, will then fall under their management. Whether it gets allocated to different organizations is a different story, but Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, we have to get their involvement to try and improve veld management practices. PPRI, in charge of biological control and research. SANRAL, looking after the roads. A lot of the species spread down the roads because of the vehicles driving down, and that is where we have to get reported sightings and ensure that they're aware of the national program. So people actually have to start taking responsibility here, and that is local municipalities, they have to have MCE plans with the new legislation in place, and because of the strategy which now will be in place. And then again for the asset protection zones, they'll have to have MCE plans in the containment and asset protection zones. In the communities, it's important for people then to report sightings. Private landowners' responsibilities are to report sightings and clear the areas, and then herbicide assistance is available for them to know that too. So I think that's where we are at the moment. It is a long road, but we are moving forward, hopefully in the right direction, and hopefully the strategy will be implemented soon, and that we will be seeing some changes. Okay, thank you.